Welcome to the Find Your Free podcast. I am your hostess, Rachel Voss, and this is now the 6th episode that we are getting ready to roll into. We are just about a little bit over a week into the new year, I guess just about 10 days now as I'm recording this. And while I certainly hope everyone on an individual level has been having an easeful journey so far into the new year, during the week between the last podcast that was released and when I'm releasing this podcast, the week proved to be an interesting week, particularly a wild and wacky Wednesday that we all witnessed of the events that happened in DC, the events that happened at the Capitol building. And I'm not going to go too much into a discussion around that, but those events inspired today's episode or this episode. So I'm watching along with everyone else, like, oh my God, what is happening? Is this real? And a social media friend messaged me behind the scenes in response to, some pictures I had posted in my Instagram stories, just different memes and things like that around around what happened. And, I got a message in response to one of those stories with the question of, how does this make you feel as a mixed race woman? And I didn't answer the question right away because it was just kind of like, well, how do you think I might feel? I think I would feel what any other, human person might feel, or a person based in humanity, might feel like this is not cool. And when that question was posed to me, I shared it with David, and I shared it in the context of, just throughout my whole life. And I get it as a mixed race woman. I get it. You want to know perspective, but just throughout my whole life, I've always been asked that question, like, well, what do you think as a mixed woman? Or what do you think being half white? Or, just what do you think? And I don't know, I guess I get it. But in this particular moment, I found myself initially frustrated because I am, yes, a mixed race Black woman. So a mixed race woman who identifies as Black. And although I present to the world that I'm mixed, and I share with the world that I'm mixed or interracial or whichever word you choose, I primarily present to the world that I'm a Black woman. And so when the question was posed to me about how do I feel, I told David, my love, I said, it's frustrating because that makes me feel like, am I not presenting myself enough as a Black woman that somebody would ask me that question? And, Dave and I kind of talked through that. But that just kind of sat with me and inspired today's episode. So I call this episode, What Are You? Because that is the other question I have fielded my whole life. What are you when people meet me? What are you? Are you this? Are you that? So yeah, it inspired this episode. And I thought it would be a good opportunity because this podcast is partly therapeutic. I have to admit that it is really therapeutic for me to just get on the mic and talk through my shit and hopefully, provide some inspiration for the listener. But it is a space where I do share a little bit more of my story than maybe what you get from taking a yoga class with me, or maybe what you get from, reading an Instagram or Facebook post or whatever. So this podcast is a space where I get, just really, really intimate, personally, what I mean, in terms of my life. As a way to inspire, to share, to hopefully just provide some type of gem. And so I thought that this would be a good place to start with sharing my story of being a mixed woman. And as I was thinking about how I would formulate this podcast, and if you've listened to the last 2 or 3 episodes, it's kind of been the same thing of like, I have the general concept, like the title, of what I want an episode to be. But as far as like the meat and potatoes of it all, with sometimes I just get on the mic and I see what shows up. And that's definitely where I was today. I kept thinking, like, how do I want to structure this conversation? How do I want to approach it? And I think it's just approach it, just get on here and see what comes out. But I couldn't help but to think of my godmother, Dr. Martha Hennington, Mamir, as I lovingly called her. She now rests with the ancestors. She would be so proud of me for doing this. I know she's so proud. I know she's, guided me through all of this, my process of spiritual development, my process of growing as a spiritual guide. But Mamir was a professor of like writing and English, and she would edit my papers in college. And so one of the first papers she edited was in a class that I took with the great, incomparable Sonia Sanchez. And after editing my paper, I remember Mamir told me, like, you need to like tell your story. I think I shared this in the first podcast, so forgive me if I'm repeating myself 5 episodes later. But she told me, like, you need to like share your story. And I'm like, what do you mean? And she's just like, just share your perspective, like write your story, share it with like Essence or Time magazine. I'm like, Time? Like what does Time care about my story? Like I'm just, some girl from New Jersey, like going to Temple University. And she's like, you could write about, being a mixed woman. And I just was like, yeah, Mamir, but I'm just, again, a mixed kid from New Jersey. Like, what about my story? And she's just like, nobody has your story. And that always, always, always sat with me and resonated with me. And I thought about that a lot today. I've shared my story over the years, but I really feel like her energy and spirit is with me in this moment as I share the story. So I shared in the first episode, I have technically 5 older brothers. So both of my parents were married once before they married each other. And from my mom's first marriage, I have 3 brothers. And from my dad's first marriage, I have 2 brothers, one who now also rests with the ancestors. I primarily grew up with my 3 brothers on my mom's side, primarily by way of my parents divorcing. Earlier on in my life, my parents divorced when I was about 5, 6, 7 years old, like in that space of my life. And so I grew up primarily with my mom, with my 3 brothers, in a mixed community, but there was a very strong, Black presence. And so my mom hails from Texas, and my dad is, born in Connecticut, straight up New York dude. His family, I know my grandfather for sure, so my last name is German. So my father's family's German. I honestly have to admit, I don't know exactly where my paternal grandmother's family's from. I know Eastern Europe. I think I've heard that somewhere along the way. I know my stepmama, Terry, listens to this, so I'm sure she's going to send me a message and let me know, because Terry's so good about staying on top of the ancestry stuff. But so I don't honestly know clearly like where my maternal grandmother's, her name is Connie, where her family came from or comes from. And that's actually some of the work that I want to do, over this coming year, is get to know my ancestors on my dad's side more. But that's for a different conversation. So my dad is white and my mom is Black. And and I am the one and only child from their marriage to each other. And so I am the only, mixed child in my world, as far as like my parents and my siblings and all that are concerned. And, looking back or thinking back on being like little, the memories are faint. You know what I mean? Like I just was. I was always surrounded in love, with love, by love. So I'm fortunate to be able to, even if like at 43, the memories of like 3, 4, 5 are really vague by now, like everything I do look back on or that I do recall, I definitely recall in love. My parents getting divorced at a young age was tough, and there's some stuff around that I recall, but whatever. Now that I'm 43, I get it. And that's their story, not really mine to tell. But it really wasn't until probably like fifth or sixth grade, where the world kind of started pointing out to me like, hey, you're different. So some of you listeners may be old enough to remember slam books, slam books. And slam books, if you don't know, are basically like a composition book, a notebook, whatever, where a person's name is written on the top of a blank page, and the book is passed around, and everybody like writes, what they think about that person. I think there was something like that in Mean Girls, the movie Mean Girls, if anybody saw that. It was something similar to that. And so I remember like when the book came to me to look at or whatever it was, I remember like turning to my page and like hoping like, oh, everybody's going to say I'm nice and, all of this. And yeah, it was some nice stuff on there, but there was a lot of like, it really hurt. There was just a lot of like, white girl and fake hair. And I always share this one, love that horse hair, meaning my hair was fake because I had this, just this really big halo of hair. And it was just all these comments that just, the more I read them, the more they broke my heart. I remember going home and crying and just like, why don't people like me? That was like a really, really, really tough experience. I would learn some 20, 25 years later in therapy that moment was the moment in my life when I started people pleasing, because what I did in response to that was do whatever I could to fit in, so I made sure my hair wasn't so big. I tried to dress like everybody else, like whatever it was that I felt like was making me different, I would try to fix, right? But the main thing that made me different from everybody else, I can't, it's me being mixed, right? But it would take me, although I realized that, it would take me probably, first into therapy in my early 30s, recognizing what patterns came as a result of that childhood wounding, frankly. But it's really probably last year, maybe even past couple of weeks, where I'm really realizing how there was one aspect of people pleasing. There's another aspect of how this contributed to a sense of like not belonging and always finding my place. So it's interesting. So my parents did get divorced at, I think it was 5. Yeah, because my stepbrother came into my life at 7 years old. So, and when my stepbrother came into my life, interestingly enough, as life would have it, he was mixed. So, stepmama's first marriage, first husband was to a Black man. And so I have an interracial stepbrother, mixed stepbrother. So it's really cool. So we both have, we're coming into each other's lives, just by way of our parents. We crash into each other's lives, right? Our orbits, come together. Adam and I, shout out to you, Adam. And, as we're growing up, we have 2 different experiences. So I am growing up with my mom, in the predominantly Black community, just surrounded by a predominantly Black family, having just Black family reunion experiences, like all of that stuff. And my stepbrother grew up in a predominantly white community. So we have the same, background, but different life experiences. But as life would manifest itself, and as we got older and started dealing with life, I noticed that my stepbrother and I, we both were challenged with some of the same stuff, like, just the confidence, the sense of belonging, just what I would always call the mixed child syndrome. So Terry, if you're listening, you may remember that. I used to always say, I think every mixed kid everywhere has the mixed child syndrome, because you literally have 2 different identities, I guess. I don't know if that's the best word, but you have 2 different identities, 2 different experiences, 2 different worlds like going on inside of you. And it can be hard to navigate that. It can be hard to feel like, especially when we're in a world and a society that is very about boxing you in, what's your religion, man, woman, female, just who, Black, white, all of that, like everything is boxed and categorized. And so when you're not, like when you don't fit in that one box, it just can kind of whether consciously or subconsciously create this feeling of like, or the sense of like where do I belong? Like the racial check marks, oh, check all the boxes that apply. Like now they represent like mixed race and this and that. But like when I would fill out those things as a kid, it would be like black, white, Hispanic, whatever. But there was never like, I would feel like, can I pick both? But it would be like, pick which one. And I remember just feeling like but I'm both. Like as a kid, I would get those things like with a standardized test or something, like I'm both. So there's always this like conflict of like, I am this, but the world wants me to be this. And then there's how society perceives you and all these different things. And so it can absolutely knock at a person's confidence or knock at a person's sense of like fully feeling like they belong. And, then you take in stuff like middle school slam books and becoming a teenager and how the world perceives you and all that stuff, shapes your perspective on things and shapes how you move in this world. So, I remember probably around that same middle school time. I don't recall if it was before or after the slam book. It might have been around the same time. But I remember my mom sitting me down at the kitchen table and talking to me about who I was. And I remember her saying to me, like, the world sees you as a Black woman and you are like a Black woman, like you are, like you're my daughter. You come from me, you're a Black woman. And I didn't honestly realize until all of the social justice stuff that 2020 brought to surface how important it was for my mom to tell me that. Like, in that conversation, maybe she directly shaped my perception of who I was, but growing up how I grew up and growing up with my mom, growing up with a Black mom, I already felt that, like it, you know what I mean? I was just like I looked at myself as like, okay, I'm mixed. I know I don't look like my parents don't look like how my friends' parents look. Like my friends' parents are either Black, white, whatever. I don't have friends that have one Black parent and one white parent. So I know I have that, but I also I'm Black. Like my friends are Black, like, you know what I mean? I go to Black school. And so, but I say, so I knew that, and that's how I identified and that's how I moved through the world. But in terms of just really working, again, on this sense of like belonging, this thing that has kind of plagued me, for a long time, that I really didn't realize how much was plaguing me. Like with everything that came to the surface in 2020, as far as the social justice stuff goes, like I realized like I am so glad like my mom gave me permission, in a way to be who I was as a Black woman. And so navigating through the world, it was never a question for me. You know what I mean? It was never a question. And then sometime later, I think more like in my teenage years, like I was having like when my dad would pick me up on the weekends for our weekend visits, we had like a good 40-minute drive, to his house and back. And so it was like a space where we would always have just these beautiful conversations, about his law career and just books and just, all types of stuff. But I remember my dad like having the conversation with him and him saying to me, like, we've never talked about you being Black, white, mixed or whatever, like, and I never really thought it was necessary because I just, I know how the world sees you. So I just assumed you saw yourself as Black and the world perceives you as Black. And I'm a realist about how this world is. And so in that way, he gave me permission to be a Black woman too. And in thinking about that last year, like as I'm really having the understanding of my parents giving me permission, like with my dad especially, that was important because, again, as a mixed kid, like you can have this internal divide and conflict of like, I'm embracing so much of this one part of me, but maybe not so much this other part. Like I'm not so fully immersed in this other part. Some of it was just life, again, by way of my parents being divorced, and some of it just was what it was. But I'm not fully immersed like in this other part of me. And so you can feel like some guilt. Like, I don't want my dad to feel like I'm like ashamed of who he is, because I'm not. But him telling me, like, I know how the world sees you. This is how I see you. And so if that's how you see yourself, it's all good. So it's like he gave me permission in the way that I didn't have to feel guilty. I didn't have to feel guilty about owning myself as a Black woman, even though I have like a white father. Like, I didn't have to feel guilty about that. And so growing up and having the family I have, I always tell like just my closest circle, I always say, like, with my parents getting divorced early and being the only mixed kid, and, my stepmom's family coming into my orbit, and just all of what could have been, I'm very fortunate, as far as I can recall, like in my world, nobody ever made me feel like less than. Nobody ever made me feel like you don't belong. Like, there was just none of that. Like, it was just always love, and your baby sister or your daughter or, whatever you are. I was now big sister to Adam. Like, there was always love. And I always felt like if one person in my world was like untoward towards me, like, that could have like completely jacked me up. But I'm fortunate that there was love. However, what I am realizing more so now than ever is that nobody taught me how to navigate this world as a mixed woman. And that's no fault of my mom. That's no fault of my dad. Neither one of them had an interracial kid before. And I was born in 1977, so not, the loving like case, the one in Virginia where the white man and the Black woman, like, they were fighting against the state of Virginia to be married to each other, because Virginia had the law that like you couldn't have a mixed race marriage. And I should have probably checked this before the podcast, but again, I didn't know where I was going to go. That law was either, struck down right before or right after or right around when I was born. So that, that's still like on the books. Like, in some states, my parents could not be. And so I'm coming in that time. And so, it's not as, it's just more common. We just see more mixed race children now than maybe we did, 43 years ago. So nobody knew how to teach me that. Like, my mom's whole experience, her whole life was being a Black woman. And my dad is, being a white guy, like, and I'm his, their first daughter for both of them. So all of it was a new experience. And my dear friend Evelyn, shout out to you, Evelyn. Like, I remember her telling me like a couple of years ago, like, yeah, like, your mom didn't know how to navigate this interracial girl child, like, throughout this world. And that was the first time I had some awareness around that. But again, the real work of understanding, like, I'm in that place now. And so understanding that I didn't have the tools to navigate. Like, I didn't, David and I were even talking about this earlier. He's like, it's not even like you had like a mixed big sister or just a big sister period to like, show you just the ropes of just being a girl in this world and all this type of stuff. Like, you have 3 older brothers, all of them just telling me like, just don't get pregnant. My mom telling me like, just don't have sex. You know what I mean? Like, but there was no just, it's not that it was just about sex. I'm just thinking of like conversations that they would have for me as far as like growing up and being a young lady. But, there was just no like, hey, like, what do you feel like being mixed? As a matter of fact, and just being very honest here. So my oldest brother, Philip, my heart, well, all of my brothers are my heart, but the eldest of my sibling crew, Philip is 20 years older than me. So, I came a little bit later on in life. And so my brother was 20 when I was born. And so around 6, 7, 8, like I maybe more like 8, 9, 10. So again, maybe in that same space of like the world pointing out to me like, hey, you're mixed, you're different. I remember even feeling like there was a point where my brother actually didn't like me because I was half white. He never said anything. he, again, there was nobody in my world that made me feel less than, but I felt that. And looking back, Philip is tall and strapping and just big dude. He was on NYPD and, all of that. And so back then, looking back on my life, Philip was not the kind of the most emotional, softest dude. Now as he's gotten older and he's had kids and grandkids and all that stuff, like he's definitely Mr. Softy now. Sorry, Phil, but you are. But back then, it was probably more him just kind of like not being this like emotional person. Obviously more so than him not liking me because I was white. But like that was like some of the stuff that I carried as a kid. And like I even have a diary entry where I wrote that. Like I'll never forget, I wrote like, today's the day I learned my brother doesn't like me because I'm half white. And then what's really hilarious is like, I'm like, okay, diary, but I'll write back again tomorrow. Like it was totally okay for my brother not to like me, or for me to have the idea that my brother wouldn't like me because I was half white. But like this is the shit like I'm carrying around as a kid, but I'm not able to really talk about. And it's not that my mom was the type of mom that didn't hold space for me to talk, but I just think that there was no, unless I brought it up, like the way it was, the way I was impacted or affected at school, like from my recollection, there was like, no, just like, how is this experience for you? You know what I mean? Like, so there, I would just carry stuff, just carry stuff. And so trying to navigate this world as a mixed child, a mixed girl, again, all brothers. So there's no, like outside of my mom, there's no, softness, you know what I mean? So, and then my brother, the one who's closest to my age, like he left for college by the time I'm 8, 9. So I'm like in the house, just by myself with my mom and my friends and all of that. And so realizing that like I didn't have this guidance or this navigation, and having to always figure out like, who am I? Where do I belong? The world asking me, the world wanted me to categorize myself, my peers, obviously having discomfort with me, being different. If I knew then what I knew now, I would know that it was more their shit than mine. You know what I mean? Like whatever my being mixed kicked up for those people. But, so it's like understanding and taking all of that in and connecting it with what is still my personal healing work. I realize like how much having to figure out this journey, this navigation, if you will, of being a mixed woman, like how much that has played into my sense of like, where do I belong, for a long time. And I don't know if this is going to come across as crazy. I hope it makes sense. But for a long time, as I was trying to find like my tribe, my people, I would worry that like, it was really weird. It was like my peers were Black women. But then I went for high school, my mom took me out of a public high school I was in and put me into a private, predominantly white, all girls Catholic high school. So I actually did my formative high school years in like a predominantly white high school. There started off with like 10 of us in the class of 95. There was one lone Black person crossing that stage in 1995. Hello, that was me. So my peers are predominantly Black, like the peers I grew up with. But then I have, my high school peers and all of that, my white friends and, other Cubans, Colombians, like just, all of that I met from high school. But my core group, again, because of my mom and how I grew up, is Black woman. Like that's my group. And so in college, I guess I didn't think about it so much. In college, it was just trying to figure out who the fuck I was, you know what I mean, on so many different levels. But it was more like getting out of college and really starting to enter like womanhood and really starting to put together the pieces of like who I am. When I started to confront like, yeah, I have this fear that like Black women won't respect me. And that would just be like, if I went into a room being light skinned, would darker skinned Black women think, I would project onto darker skinned Black women that they would think I thought I was better than them because I was light skinned, right? So because in the African American community, if you're not aware, there is, and I'm not going to talk about that too much, but there is like the colorism issue. And that's in societies everywhere. It's in India, that's everywhere. But especially like in the Black community, definitely like this, the light skin versus dark skin, like that's like a thing. And so I have always been sensitive to that, in that I've never wanted anybody to think I think I'm better than them just because the color of my skin, or just because my dad is white. I don't move in this world, I don't think, as somebody who thinks they're better than, but it was a fear that I always had. And so I would take that fear, project it into community spaces I would go into, and would think they're not going to respect me. They're not going to accept me. They're going to think I'm silly light-skinned girl. They're going to think I'm not really grounded. They're going to think I'm not really one of them. Like, it was just these constant projections. And yet I never actually had that experience, right? Like they say, the fear itself is worse than like the actual thing you might be fearing. So I'm fearing I'm going to walk into a room and they're going to be like, light-skinned chick, get the hell out of here, or whatever. And, and it's like, that never happened. It was just like my fear of it. And again, my dear friend Evelyn, I'm always so grateful for her. Like, this really came to a head for me personally, but then was the point where I pivoted in a positive way, where 10 years ago this year, Evelyn invited me to an event called the Red Tent. And it was like a day-long event just for women to come together to heal. It was based on the book, The Red Tent, which I ultimately read, which I ultimately loved. And Evelyn was like, yeah, hey, come. Like, it's going to be a day of like workshops and healing and just women coming together and da-da-da-da. And I remember I was going to go there by myself. Evelyn was like working behind the scenes, panelist, so she wouldn't be able to kind of like be by my side all day. So it was just like, come, like, you'll be fine. And I remember freaking out, like, I'm going to go in this space and they're going to tell me to get out. Like, I really had this fear. They're going to be like, get out. And I walked in, and instead, like, not that I had never seen this before, but I guess it was like the first time, like, I walked into this space, beautiful Black women of every shade, size, hairstyle, whatever you can think of, and every hue. Like, I was sitting next to a woman who was probably more fair skinned than I was, and she was in there just completely owning her space. And it was in that space where I was first introduced to my yoga teacher, not personally, but she spoke on a panel, and I just remember being so attracted to her energy, but we never personally met. And in fact, it wasn't until a year later where we were actually connected in person, but that's when she first came, I love to say, in my orbit. And so that day was important for me personally, and for a lot of reasons. Like, first, it was a day that helped me realize like just some of the spiritual stuff I was going through. Like, I was not on an island alone, because outside of like trying to navigate this world as a mixed woman who sees herself as Black, and trying to figure out how to categorize myself when I feel like uncategorizable, if that's a word, I was also like on my spiritual journey of like shifting from Christianity. I moved through Islam. I talked about that. I think it was in the last episode. And I shifted from Christianity to Islam, to like just kind of moving from religious to spiritual. And when I was moving in more of a religious way, like there was always that statement like, oh, if you say you're spiritual instead of religious, like you're a cop out, like you need to like claim a religion. But as I became more spiritual, I'm like, for me, this is where it's at, because spiritual, I was doing more everyday work and practice than I was when I was religious. Religious was like show up on Sunday, or when I was practicing Islam, like do your 5 prayers, fast during Ramadan, like just do the things. But, what was I doing in between? You know what I mean? Like, what was I doing Monday through Saturday? But when I became more spiritual, more aware of just like my presence, my existence, like how it was showing up in this world, like that was a conflict for me too, because I was moving outside of the box of how like my family raised me and how my family knew me. I was the only one. Well, Philip converted to the Nation of Islam younger, but like nobody like bothered him about it. But with me, I felt like, there was always just kind of like, what are you doing? And again, so much love. I'm so close with my brothers. Like, my mom has done an amazing job, of creating like 4 very close-knit kids. Like, her 4 kids are so super close, the 4 of us. But, I knew in a lot of ways that I was different. And some of it would cause me to shrink myself. Some of it was because I was baby sister. Some of it was because I just wasn't sure of my place in this world, and that, impacted like my confidence and stuff like that. But, I would just notice that like I was different. And so when I really started the beginning of my spiritual journey, like that's when it really stood out. And I would just feel like I would feel sensitive. I would feel like I'd have to defend myself, sometimes at family discussions and, all of that. And so I'm trying to like find myself spiritually, as well as just like figure out who I am, trying to figure out my place in this world as a Black woman. And so that event was beautiful because it kind of, not even kind of, it did help me begin to really deal. Like, again, it made me feel like I wasn't alone in the spiritual stuff I was dealing with. And then when I left that day, I was like, you have nothing to be afraid of. You know what I mean? Like to be who you are. And it would still even continue to be like a journey from there of figuring myself out, my place in this world as a Black woman. But that moment was so pivotal in terms of like, just relax. And then ultimately that fear of like, will they respect me, shifted to like when I became an entrepreneur. And then it was like, well, now will I be respected as like a businesswoman? And that's even still something that I still feel like I'm trying to get my family to see and respect. Like they love me, they support me, but sometimes I still feel like I'm very much like, look at me, like look at what I'm doing, And, I think that like I was talking about this with David today, and I'm like, do you think my family treats me different or sees me as different, or do you think it's just me being sensitive? And he's like, I think it's both and. Like, I think they definitely, have moments where it's just like, okay, that's Rachel, little sister, whatever, like, whatever. And then I think sometimes like you think they're doing that, or you think it's something, but it's not, but it's just because you're kind of hypersensitive from your experience. So it's a little bit both and. But it all comes back again to this idea of like, where do I belong? So, I'm still growing very much as a businesswoman. I'm still growing very much as an entrepreneur and as a spiritual guide. And sometimes I feel like I'm hitting this wall of like going further and expanding more and like being like, I don't like to use this word too much, but frankly, being like a real boss bitch, you know what I mean? Like, and I'm like, what holds me back from that? Like, I always reference at least once in an episode, I'm a Scorpio woman. And, just throughout my life, like friends or people who knew I was a Scorpio would just be like, yo, like, why don't you like be that Scorpio? Like, like don't just be like nice and timid and all this stuff. And I'd be, my stinger comes out for sure, but it would never come out like in a way of like, don't fuck with me. Like it wouldn't come out like that. Like that's just not, who I am. Unless you're David getting back with me after we broke up. I was definitely in a space of like, don't fuck with me. But then I softened up. Total sidebar. But, so it's like, I felt for a long time like, is it fear that's holding me back? It's fear. I had this fear of like going further. But then I remember I was thinking about that and I'm like, I don't think it's fear that's holding me back. Like I walked away from a 6-figure job, like as a single mom. Like I was a single mom for 10 years. I walked away from a marriage. I walked away from Christianity. I walked away from New Jersey and moved to DC by myself, not knowing like where I was going. Like I've done the things, right? So it's not so much fear. And I had to have this conversation with myself because I wanted to make sure I was focusing on the right thing in terms of how to move forward and how to find growth just in my world, in my life as a businesswoman. And I'm like, I don't want to focus on the wrong work. And when I realized like it's not so much fear as it is like you're just not owning your shit, then the work became, okay, well, what happened and how do I put that back together? And so, when I go back to that first moment of the slam book and, again, learning from therapy, how that kicked me into people pleasing, I go back and I realize like that, just not having the guidance of how to navigate this world, like as a mixed woman, having to find my own sense and place of belonging, going, to this like all white, high school, very kind of important time in a young woman's life, like, again, trying to figure out like who I am. And so then you get into relationships and life, and I realize like what has been a repeated pattern of mine is the shrinking, is the giving away of my power, because why, right? Fear that I'm not going to be respected, or trying to find my place, or whatever it is. But I've given away my power, and that's why it's hard for me to walk in it fully, because I haven't embraced it fully. And some of it is the life stuff. Some of it is my own stuff. Like, again, I've never kind of walked through this world of like, don't fuck with me. I guess I could fall on the fact that I had 3 brothers. So I would say, oh, if you fuck with me like my brothers, but you know what I mean? But so it's stepping into it all. And, I feel like the more I do this work of healing and awareness and understanding, the more I will step into my power, and the more I will see myself expand in this world spiritually, through my work, however else, I show up. So, yeah, this, it's interesting. I didn't know what story I would tell about being mixed. Like, what do I think about the stuff that happened last week? I think it's bullshit. I think I watched my Black brothers and sisters protest repeatedly, not just last year, but in 2000 that, when all these other police shootings and things happened. I went to my first police shooting protest at like 12 years old. There was a police shooting of a young Black man. I grew up in Inglewood, in the town next to me, Teaneck. I was protesting police shootings then. My mother, you know what I'm saying? So like, I've seen what happens when my Black brothers and sisters try to peacefully protest, and to see the madness that happened on Wednesday, it made me mad. Some of it is comical, like, look at these motherfuckers climbing the wall, excuse my language. But then it's like, and somebody did a really great meme of like one of those dudes falling off the wall, and they cued the Mario music with it, the Super Mario. So like when Super Mario like dies, like somebody made a meme of cueing that music to somebody falling off the wall. That was hilarious. But in the grand scheme of things, it was just like some bullshit, and it's bullshit that I already knew was there. But, when you're just reminded of the bullshit, like, it infuriates me. It infuriates me that like there was a noose, a construct made for a noose to hang. And it infuriates me. It infuriates me to know that if my Black brothers and sisters had to taken 1 foot up them steps, they'd be gassed, and rubber bullets and all of that stuff, right? It infuriates me as a Black woman, as a mixed race woman, I'll probably have to always field that question of, how does it make you feel? What do you think? And again, I'm okay with that. That's just part of the journey. It's just, when I realize the parts of my journey. And so giving myself permission to belong, giving myself permission to take back, embrace, and own my power, like, that's where I am in life right now. And I'm always trying to figure out how to put the pieces of me together, right? So there's like Black woman me, but there is mixed woman me. There is like my white dad and my white family and my white cousins, and they're just people who I love, but they are white. And so there's my white family, there's my Black family, there's my Black yoga students, there's my white yoga students. Like, I love people, man. I love good people who are trying to do good in this world. I love people who are good to me. I love people who are good to like other people. I know what it is. I know how the world sees me. I know how I see myself. But the part of me that is mixed does have this sort of what I call the one love mentality. Like, love is love, and humans are humans. And so I see things on a humanitarian level. But yeah, so there's that part of me. There's, the white part of me. There's the part of me that is studying like African traditional religion and balancing that with what I'm studying as far as like yoga from a Hindu perspective, and understanding, just embracing kind of the more minimal life that yoga invites. Like, we don't need all the things, but like also having a desire to still have a Chanel bag. I even like Rolexes. I didn't like those before. Like, so there's all these different parts of me that my whole life I felt like I've had to categorize. And I'm always like, how do I present myself? And how do people want me to be? And I'm always looking for permission instead of just giving myself permission to be who the fuck I am, you know? So when it's like, what are you? It's like, I am. I am. And that's this next journey for me. That's my work for 2021 is I am, and being in that. If anybody watched Lovecraft Country over the summer, super great show. There was the episode with Hippolyta and, you know, her dealing with that same, not as far as being mixed, but trying to figure out who she was as a Black woman and as a mom. And, you know, she was a wife, but she was brilliant, you know, with like astrophysics or whatever it was that her superpower was, you know, and that episode dealt with I am, like you just are. And if you haven't watched Lovecraft Country, I would highly recommend it. And so that's what I'm working towards in my life, just being who I am, you know, just being who I am. So I'm sure my experience of being mixed will come up again, you know, in this podcast, as I get to a place where I'm able to start inviting people in. I love to have discussions around just race and being mixed. And, you know, I love to have other perspectives. And so this is not a conversation that's going to be one and done. This is just a conversation for this episode. This is actually, you know, a starting point for other discussions. But I just felt to share that today, you know, again, if inspired is the right word, but inspired by the events, you know, that happened at the Capitol, and being asked, like, what are you? So I'm going to go ahead and put a pin in it there. I want to shift to reading my passage and getting ready to close this episode out. I hope it's an episode that makes sense. I kind of feel like it might have been a little disjointed, but, you know, hopefully there was a gem or some sort of dots that were connected. And if not, thanks for hanging in there for however long it is. And I'll try to be a little bit more concise, you know, in the next episode. But usually I find I land somewhere, even if I feel like, where the fuck are you going? So, but yeah, that's some of my story of being a mixed woman, a mixed Black woman, and just finding my sense of belonging and being who I am. So with that, shifting the energy to finding a comfortable seat. As always, resting your feet on the ground. If you're sitting on a chair, if you're sitting on the floor, on a couch, or anywhere else, just finding a tall spine, sitting comfortably. Maybe close the eyes if that feels good. Take a deep breath in. Exhale out through the mouth. And I was trying to find a passage that would really kind of be aligned, you know, with this episode. I was trying to find a passage around like belonging, and I couldn't find anything specific to that. But then I came across this one passage in the book Prayers of Honoring Grief by Pixie Lighthorse, and it just felt right. So this is the passage I'm going to share, and it's called Honoring Yearning. Thank you for this day of piercing desire for things to be different. Teach me to be with what actually is. Help me accept that my appetite to move beyond is my body's way of writhing through the discomfort of difficulty. Help me realize that I will get there if I meet my present grief and those that lie underneath it. Help me to honor the intrinsic function that is helping me slowly begin to understand the depth of my suffering and its power over me. Help me comprehend that craving is my teacher. Show me the child inside of me who was not filled in the way I needed to be. Help me to be free of obligation to my trauma and put me on the road of giving myself care in the way I need most. Show me that I can count on myself now. Nurture my heart, my womb, and my broken body. Lay the hands of your light on my discontentedness. Fill me up with the beauty of each moment of presence, even when my cup seems to overflow with sadness. Let me hold it all. Balance my longing for tears with my longing for laughter. Make room for both of them inside of me. Let me work with you until I am absolutely certain it will not always be this way, and let's continue our collaboration. Help me transform my belief that my destiny is to feel empty and distraught. Remind me to make meaning of my world by being meaningful in the world, by sharing my song of misfortune with others and punctuating it with what has helped me the most. Teach me to be satisfied with the quality of my real emotions. When light and dark live inside me in equal measure, neither will consume me. So I landed on this and decided to read this because I loved honoring yearning, because ultimately that's what this episode and my journey is about. I am yearning to be the absolute best version of myself. I am yearning to move through this world authentically. I am yearning to move through this world in authority and my power and my queendom. I am yearning for that. And even the one line, show me the child inside of me who is not filled in the way I need it to be. So there's a lot of talk, in the spiritual world about your original wound. Like, what was your original wound? Because it's from the original wound where your work and how you move through this world can influence you, right? So my original wound was, I used to always say it was that slam book moment, and that's part of it. But now I'm realizing my original wound, honestly, is being mixed. And not like in a bad way, but in a way like I came into this world with no template, with nobody who had a template. And so as such, I was a child who didn't get what I needed, so to speak, in that way in terms of guidance, right? So the passage says, show me the child who was not filled in the way I needed to be. So my parents filled me with what they could fill me with, which was love and education and wisdom and class and grace and all of those things that are a crucial part of who I am. But now at 43, I have to go back and heal that original wound. And the way, I think I shared this in an episode or two before, I tend to try and figure out like what the exact thing is so I can fix it. But it's really just accepting that this was my experience. And I do, but accepting it from a place of like really healing and healing that childhood wound and knowing like my parents did the best they could. I know they did, but I never really thought about them not having the tools that I would need, as a mixed kid. Because now if I, have a mixed child, I'm in a better position to guide that child than my parents were to guide me. And really, some of that is the point of the journey, or at least part of our journeys, right? To heal ancestral wounds, to heal wounds from our parents, from our family, so that we can either, pass that healing on, or we can break generational curses or wounds. Like all of it is about, we're the connector between the past and the future. All of us that are listening to this podcast right now, that are in this space in life right now, like we're all connecting the past and the future. Taking what our parents gave us, what our parents didn't give us, whoever was in our community, like taking all of that and just trying to do better for the next generation. And, I just learned in this last week that, because I'm now in a rites of passage program for women, and I'm super excited about that. It's a 9-month program over the course of this year. And I love that it's 9 months because, as I've shared, like I am manifesting my second child, my baby girl, and of course, that's a 9-month process, but I realize, and that's been a journey. She's not here yet. But I realize like I probably have to give birth to myself, before I can truly give birth to this little girl. Because again, when it comes to healing those generations, like I don't want to pass on to my daughter a sense of not belonging. So I've got to heal that within myself so I don't pass that along. And so working with the sister who's leading the rites of passage, we had a one-on-one conversation about some of my goals and what I was looking for. And I was talking to her about some of this and this understanding that I'm having. And when I would talk about my parents not having the tools, I would immediately right behind that say, but they're great parents. Da, 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 da. And she stopped me. She said, listen, you don't have to give the quantifications or for your parents. It's okay if they didn't have everything that you needed. It's okay if they didn't have all the tools. It doesn't make them bad parents. It just makes it what it was. And so I'm learning that, right? I'm learning to say, okay, yeah, they didn't have it, and that's okay. And my journey has been finding my place, and now it's living, in that place authentically and in my power. So again, when you are faced with the question, what are you? Whether you're black, white, purple, polka dots, just you are. I am. And that's my journey. Again, I am. So, with that, lovelies, again, I hope this was a podcast or an episode at least that you were able to get something from. If not, I just hope you enjoy sharing this journey with me. I am grateful for everybody who listens and shares a good word about this. I'm really, again, loving this journey, and I'm excited to see where it will go. So with that, I'm going to end, as I always do, by saying, may you be happy, may you be free, may you be peaceful, easeful, useful, and joyful. The light in me honors the light in each of you. Thank you for joining, and I'll see you next week.